Hi, everybody, and thank you for having me today. My name is Sarah McHale, and I'm going to be talking to you today about the ecology of oaks and why we care and some of our efforts here in McHenry County. I am the community engagement specialist with the Land Conservancy of McHenry County. We are a nonprofit land trust, been around since 1991. And we love oak trees and all the associated things that come along with them. So today we're just going to be talking a little bit about the ecology of them, why they're so cool and exciting, along with some of the efforts that we have going on here in McHenry County to preserve and take care of them. Okay, so why do we care? Why do we care so much about all of these oak trees? They're what's known as a keystone species. That's just this fancy word for lots of different kinds of things depend on them. And part of the reason why so many things depend on our oaks is because they're so widespread and they've become so integrated into the ecological fabric of different communities throughout the globe. Here in the United States, we have 90 species of oaks that are native. And in Northern Illinois, we have 12. And I've got listed there all of the 12 species. I am not going to bore you by reading all of them, but they fall into two main categories of the white oak group and the black oak group. And here's some of our three most common. We have bur oaks, we have white oaks, we have red oaks. You can see the red oaks, which fall into the black oak family, not confusing at all, have those pointed tips on their leaves. And then the bur oaks and the white oaks are very kind of rounded lobes to their leaves. You can look at the differences in the acorns. The bur oak is kind of the quintessential savanna oak tree with really deeply grooved bark. Red oaks and white oaks are going to be found in more shadier kind of wooded areas. And we're going to talk more about each of the different kinds of oak communities that are found in the area as well. So another reason why we care, in addition to them being keystone species, and we're going to talk more about that and like the minutia of who exactly depends on these oak trees. But from a historical standpoint, where you guys are in Winnebago County, you can look at this map, which is really great. This is from the Flora and Vegetational History of Winnebago County. The light gray areas in the map, that's what was pre-settlement, so pre-1830s. That was oak woodland, some form of oak woodland. Okay, the little black areas is, well, what is in 1971, they call that remaining timber. Now, remaining timber doesn't necessarily mean intact oak woodland. It just means there's trees there. What's left in Winnebago County of your pre-settlement oak woodland is 0.3%. So one reason we care is we've lost so much. And it's the same situation here in McHenry County as well. We've lost about 87% of our oak woodlands since settlement. Okay, so 13% of our oak woods remain. And you could see from this map, the light gray, that's the pre-settlement oak woods. We were much more wooded than you guys were in Winnebago County. You were much more open historically, lots of prairie. We had a lot of woods here in this county, so we have a little bit more left. But why do we care about preserving them? You know, they're integrated into the history and the fabric of our county and our homes. And now we're going to talk more about why, all the little things that kind of depend on them. All right, so let's talk about our different kinds of oak communities that are found in Northern Illinois. So a community is an area that is made up of certain sets of plants, trees, shrubs. It's going to be determined by the topography, by the type of soil. Is it facing north? Is it facing south? So there's all different factors, like where does the water run through? A lot of different things go into determining what kind of community is present there. It's made up of all the plants. It's made up of the fungi, the mosses, the lichens, the trees, the shrubs, everything, the birds, the insects, all of it, okay? And within the oak communities, there's different kinds of oak communities. There could be, and we're going to talk more about each one. There's barrens, savanna, woodlands, and forests. And this picture that you're looking at here is an example of a pretty common example of the an oak woodland or oak savanna floor. In spring, I think I took this in May at some point. Got a nice layer of sedges on the ground, which look like grass, but it's not, it's sedges, along with some wildflowers above it. So that's mayapple. A lot of you are probably familiar with that. Some dead wood laying on the ground too. So all of these little things, they kind of knit together, especially under the ground with their root systems. And we're going to talk more about that. All right, so the communities. What does this mean? What is an oak barrens? An oak barrens is extremely rare now, mainly because of the lack of fire. So an oak barrens was basically just this big open area that had some oak trees growing in it, but there was such frequent fire that a lot of times those oak trees weren't necessarily able to grow to maturity. They just kind of stayed stunted and little. And so did anything woody growing there, okay? And a lot of times it was only the oaks that really were able to withstand that kind of fire and be able to even have a thriving underground root system. Because even though if they would get fired consistently, even if they were top killed, the root system under the ground would continue to grow, especially with the bur oaks. So our oak barrens basically disappeared after settlement, because it makes sense if you think about it. Settlers and us, we stopped fire, right? Fire is a dangerous thing that can wipe out our crops, can wipe out our homes. So as fire was removed, we lost our oak barrens, everything grew up. But this was an open canopy, well, hardly even a canopy. It was just an open situation with lots of grasses and wildflowers growing in it. And then to get a little bit shadier, so we go to the oak savanna. So 10 to 20%, 25% canopy cover in an oak savanna. It's going to be characterized by these wide, open grown bur oaks with just wide stretching branches. Still a lot of sunlight reaching the ground, okay? Still dominated by grasses, sedges, wildflowers, definitely, and still getting fire, all right? Not as frequently as the oak barrens though. So a really, really diverse community, because you have some pockets of shade and a lot of pockets of sun. So you get plants inhabiting all those little niches that some like shade, some like sun, some like both. So you've just got an incredibly biodiverse situation happening there. And then we have our oak woodlands, which is even shadier. So 25 to 60% canopy cover. These are going to be mainly dominated by white oaks in the upland areas, red oaks in the lower, wetter areas. These are going to be characterized by straight up and down trees. And this makes sense. as they reach to the sunlight. All right, trees grow towards light, and as these aren't really getting exposed to light until they get up into the canopy, and that's when they're going to start to spread out. So the ground layer in the woods starts to be a little bit less diverse. Some, especially spring ephemeral wildflowers, when the leaves aren't quite out yet on the trees, a lot of those in these woodland areas, along with some grasses and sedges in the understory, but a thick, nice carpet of oak leaf litter as well. And then we have the shadiest of all, the oak forests. These are 60 to 100% canopy covered, so super densely shaded. And these are pretty rare in our area, and they were historically as well. But they would have developed in these really kind of hilly areas that maybe didn't experience as much an intense of fire as the savannas and the barrens would have. So these are going to be dominated by the spring ephemeral wildflowers. So things that are only growing early in the spring before the oak trees have leafed out. Like you can see here, this beautiful picture of woodland phlox. Love this one. All right, so to dive into the ecology of these oak trees, I want to start under the ground and with the roots. There's this conception with oak trees that it's all about their taproot, and that their taproot is the most important part. And that is true when they're young, okay? But as they get older, they're going to start really growing laterally, side to side, as you can see in this diagram here. The other thing I want to point out is the fact that these lateral roots are growing significantly beyond the drip line. So the drip line is just the edge of the canopy there. And just notice how far out those roots are going. So when we're thinking about protecting our oak trees, you need to think far beyond the drip line. And you need to really think about under the ground as well, because for the first, I don't know, decade or so is when a lot of that taproot development is happening. But as they get older, the growth of the lateral roots just increases exponentially. It's crazy how fast those lateral roots are going to grow. And those lateral roots, that's where the majority of nutrient and water exchange is happening. And I want you to notice how shallow these roots actually are. Some of them are within the first 2 feet of the soil, okay? If each little square there is 1 foot, or sorry, each little square is 2 feet. You can see that there are some roots that are extending that are within the first 2 feet, okay? And then the first 4 feet, and then the first 6 feet. Like, they're generally pretty shallow. And so when you're talking about protecting your oaks, it's important that you're not compacting the soil around those oaks and out beyond the drip line as well, because you can see this is what's happening. And in the first foot of the soil is where the mycorrhizal fungi is found. And I always hear people talk about mycorrhizal fungi, and it's just like this elusive thing. So like, here's a picture of what it actually looks like. So mycorrhizal fungi, what is this? Mycos, from the root word means fungus, and then rhiza is root. So it's literally root fungus. And what these do is they have a relationship with tree roots, and there's specific kinds that will have a relationship with oak roots, where the fungus gives the tree roots nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen and water, and in exchange, the fungus gets sugar. okay, or carbohydrates, which is a byproduct of the photosynthesis process. And here is an actual picture of that like happening. This is super cool at the cellular level. This is a cross section, okay, of some root cells. And the blue is the actual mycelium fungus. And you can see that it's infiltrating in between the spaces in between the cells. So the white are little cells, and it's just really infiltrating into the very center. That's so neat how you can see that. And that's where the nutrient exchange is happening. And this is just one method of the way this fungus works. It's way more detailed. I'm simplifying it a lot here, but it benefits our oak trees, and it also benefits the fungus as well. And this is why it is so important to have native plants growing around your oak trees, okay? Because native plants help build these kinds of fungal connections under the soil. It's not just about the trees. So it's great to plant oak trees and take care of your oak trees, but if you've just got a carpet of lawn grass underneath them, or non-native invasive buckthorn or something like that, those have no relationships with this fungus, and it's not going to be helping to build those layers. All right. The other thing that's really important is that you're not driving a vehicle over the root systems of these oak trees, because I mean, this fungus, all these tiny, very thread-like connections are found in the very upper layer of the soil. So when you drive over that, you're really compressing that, and you want to avoid that if possible. All right, so then moving up from the roots, we're going on to the trunk. And a lot of you probably know this, but oaks are some of the hardest wood found in North America. And that leads to an increased capacity for carbon storage, which is super important during this time of climate change. And not only is it efficiently storing carbon above ground, it's also storing it below ground. That whole mycelium situation and the fungus that I just talked to you about, that is also storing fungus under the ground, or carbon under the ground, which is a whole other program, but that's super fascinating too. So these trees are acting as long-term carbon storage. It's not a super fast growing, short-lived tree. It's going to really give you bang for the buck for carbon storage for hundreds of years. That's what we want. I mean, oaks can live in ideal situations around the world 900 plus years. Here in our area, some of the oldest oaks found are going to be just over 400 years old. I mean, you got to think about they're dealing with development pressure, they're dealing with invasive plants, they're dealing with disease, they're dealing with all kinds of stuff. All right. So moving from the trunk to the branches. Some of you may have heard the term a wolf tree, or potentially this here is what in McHenry County we call our wolf oak. And this is at our Wolf Oak Woods Preserve in Woodstock, just off of Route 120. This tree is a bur oak and is aged at over 350 years old. And what this wolf term means, they believe that it dates back to the foresters in the early 1900s who didn't necessarily appreciate the space that these big old open grown trees would take up. And then they just took up too many resources, similar to wolves hunting all kinds of prey animals in the woods and the ways that they wanted to extirpate wolves. So that's supposedly where this term wolf tree or wolf oak comes from. So we're lucky enough to have this tree preserved here in McHenry County. And it's hard to communicate to you the massiveness of these low branches. and how they literally are so heavy that they grow into the ground. The weight of them has brought them down into the ground, and then they continue growing back up towards the sunlight. It's really, really amazing. If you're ever out this way, I suggest that you stop by and visit. They're invaluable from like a habitat perspective. It's crazy, all the tiny hollows and the branches and the thick, gnarly bark that's super resistant to fire. Just the way, the habitat and all the little nooks and crannies that's provided by this tree. You stand there and you look at this tree and you really understand why they are a keystone species when you look around. And this was covered in buckthorn, okay? And over the years, the Land Conservancy has done some pretty heavy restoration work, not just at this tree, but in the rest of the 30 acres of this site to remove the invasive non-native brush so these trees can really breathe again and the wildflowers can come back and that kind of thing. Okay, so moving on from the branches, oaks have flowers. Who would have thought? They are wind pollinated. All right, so two different terms here. Monoecious just means that the oaks, they contain separate male and female parts on the same tree. So here you can see the male parts are those dangling catkins. I'm going to show you a picture of the female parts on the next slide, but they're much harder to see and they're usually located higher up in the canopy on much thinner branches. Their oaks are also dichogamous. All right, that's a fun word to say. Let's talk about this. So those catkins there early in the spring, and some of you might have done this before, like when you flick those catkins, pollen just puffs out of them. All right, wind picks up those pollen grains and they are floated away to another oak tree. Could be nearby, could be far away. And if the female parts are open, they're going to receive that pollen grain. And then if everything is right, like it's not, you know, a sudden cold freeze or it's not super wet, fertilization is going to happen and acorns are going to develop. Now, a question that I asked myself for a long time, and that people, like, we used to talk about this, like, all right, so if the pollen is being airborne out of these catkins, why isn't it fertilizing itself on the same tree? Why aren't the female parts on this same red oak receiving that pollen? And it's because they're dichogamous, which means that the female parts aren't going to be open on this particular tree when it is actually releasing pollen from those little catkins. Okay, but maybe the female parts are open on a different tree at that particular moment. There's a lot of timing things that need to happen just right in order for fertilization to happen. And here's some close-up really cool pictures of what happens when fertilization occurs. So when the pollen is floating through the air and it's captured, or it lands just right on one of those female flowers, like you could see on the left where it says May. Pollen grains are captured there. And then if fertilization occurs, as you look from left to right, what do you see developing then in June and in August? But a little tiny acorn. Pretty cool. Some oaks, like the red oaks, they take some time to be able to develop the acorns, so 2 seasons for the acorns to actually grow to maturity. Okay, white oaks take 1 season. And then people always ask me, like, how old do oak trees need to be before they're going to produce acorns? And it depends on the species and stress and that kind of stuff. But to say after around 20 years for the red oaks and around 35 years for the burrs and the whites would be pretty standard. So it takes a long time for them to actually develop acorns. And the acorns are the start of the whole new generation. Okay, some acorns start germination as soon as they reach the ground, like the white oaks. All right, and they are going to, as you can see in this picture, put all of their development into the taproot when they're young. All right, and then they rest. So they fall on the ground, they germinate right away, they develop that little taproot, which actually gets pretty deep. And then they just rest for a year. There's going to be hardly any above ground growth in that first year. It might just be a few inches of above ground growth, while really everything else is going into the development of the taproot. Okay. For really the first like 2 years or something, you're not going to see that much happening above ground. Lots of acorns produced by, a typical oak can produce 3 million acorns in its average lifetime. That's amazing. It's really squirrels and blue jays who are doing a lot of the acorn planting for us. And there's a lot of predation happening on oaks when they're really young. Things like voles and mice and deer and rabbits. And most of the acorns that are planted are going to be dug about an inch under the ground. And research has found that that's going to give the best germination. So if they're planted a little bit deeper than that, they're not going to germinate as well. So if squirrels accidentally plant them deeper than that, you're not going to get as good germination rates. Okay, so moving on now to the leaves. This is really interesting as we're entering fall here. You notice how the leaves really change in texture and thickness. So when they start off in the spring, they're really thin and kind of watery almost, really new and nice. And then as they get older throughout the season, they're getting thicker and tougher. And we've all heard from Doug Tallamy. Here's his new book, The Nature of Oaks. So good. About the importance of oak trees to our butterflies and moths, so our Lepidoptera, and how the caterpillars, over 500 different kinds of butterflies and moths, their caterpillars are able to eat the leaves of oak trees. And it changes throughout the season as to which species are able to actually eat. And this makes sense as they get thicker into August. There's really only going to be certain kinds of caterpillars that either A, have jaws that are thick enough to be able to really chomp through those thick oak leaves, or have developed different strategies. And August is actually the time when the most species of small caterpillars are developing on oaks. And that is a little bit counterintuitive when you think about it, because here we go with the oak leaves getting thicker and thicker. And so you'd think that it'd be less species of small caterpillars that could handle eating that. So what's the explanation? And it has to do with where they choose to eat. And this is genius if you think about it. But things like leaf miner moths just eat the center of the leaf. And here's a leaf cutout that you could see all the different layers. They don't eat that upper epidermis. They don't eat the lower epidermis. They eat the middle. They're eating like the white part of the Oreo cookie, the mesophyll. And things like leaf miner moths, as you can see on the left there, that's where they're eating and they're existing in that center section. Pretty genius survival strategy. And that's really cool because if you look through So that's like looking underneath that oak leaf with the sun, kind of shining through and spotlighting. You can see the tiny larva inside there, which is really neat from those little oak leaf miner caterpillars. And you guys, there's so many different kinds. Doug Tallamy in this Nature of Oaks book, he goes way into the weeds with these insects, like this little guy, the solitary oak leaf miner. And we've all noticed these like blotches on oak leaves in the summer. And it's these little guys here. You can see the larva in that upper left-hand corner, 1/4 of an inch long. And they exist they're real flat. They exist in the center section of the oak leaves. And 1/4 inch long, that's when they're mature. Okay, that's not when they like first hatch out of their egg. That's when they're mature and they're biggest. So what they do, the adult lays its egg on the upper side of the leaf. The larva then eats the middle layer of the leaf. That's just the caterpillar, okay, eats the middle layer of the leaf, turns into a cocoon, like you see on the bottom left there. And they overwinter inside their cocoon in the fallen leaf. All right. So the fallen oak leaves, everybody thinks they're just like dead. Who cares? No, they are harboring life within them, even when they are dead. That is amazing. All right. And then in the spring, they hatch out and the little tiny, mini little moth develops. Galls, we've all seen these on oak trees, right? And a lot of times people are like, what? This is harming the tree. No, none of these insect interactions are harming the oak trees, okay? So this is just one example of a type of gall wasp. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that Latin. Okay, maybe I will. Amphiboleps quercusinatus. There you go. Quercus is right in the species name. So there's over 800 different kinds of gall wasps, and most of them specialize on oak trees. Okay. So what happens is that tiny wasp happens to be flying around an oak tree in the spring at the very right moment. Literally, there's like a few hours where the bud on an oak tree is at the very right development stage to be ready to accept that wasp depositing its egg into the bud. Okay. And this is crazy that it's only like a few hours that this is the right moment for this to happen. And when it deposits the egg, it's also depositing like these chemicals that mimic some hormones, and that causes that growth to develop, the actual gall to develop. And this is just one kind of gall. There's just tons and tons of different kinds of weird growths that are galls from these different kinds of wasps that can develop on oak trees. This one here just happens to be called a large empty oak apple gall because it looks like a little apple kind of growing on there. And in the bottom left graphic, you can see where it says gall wasp pupa in chamber. So that's the tiny little wasp right there. And then where it says nutritive tissue, that's just like the food for the little larva to be able to eat. And it constantly replenishes itself, which is amazing. So it's basically just like laying there and having like walls of pizza surrounding you, just constantly replenishing itself, which is really cool. All right, so then eventually that thing develops into an adult wasp and it chews its way out. And you can see in the upper right there, the exit hole, okay? And as those galls are more mature, they become brown, and that's what it looks like cut open. All right, so you can see how important leaves are to the ecology of these oak habitats. And here's just one more example, a Polyphemus moth. You could see what its cocoon looks like down there in the lower right. I mean, it just looks like a straight up dead leaf laying on the ground. Okay, so when you're chipping up your leaves or raking your leaves and discarding them, it's these insects that you're getting rid of. So when you're doing that constantly throughout the year and the season, you're getting rid of a lot of these insects that so many of us are now aware of and that need our help. So, oh, here's another thing about leaves with oaks that people have noticed, marcescence, whatever, just the oaks hanging onto their leaves into the winter. And Doug Tallamy goes into this in his book. Here it is again, The Nature of Oaks. He's not sponsoring me or anything, I promise. Okay, so why does this happen? Like, why are oaks hanging onto their leaves into the winter? And there's no proven reason for it, but of course there's theories about why. And one theory is that if the leaves stay on the tree, it's going to trap more snow, which is going to increase soil moisture in the spring as that snow is melting. Okay, so that's one theory. Another one is that the leaves actually on the trees are going to be a deterrent to browsing mammals. So the leaves are actually in the winter surrounding the new bud. The bud is on there, okay, and it's just harder to eat. All right, so we cannot talk about oaks without talking about fire. And first, I just want to say there were no children harmed in the burning of that oak woods. That's my son right there, who's totally fine. So oak leaves burn beautifully. They burn way more readily than the leaves of other hardwoods. And there's a lot of reasons for that have happened over thousands and thousands of years. And this is one of the big reasons that oaks do so well with fire. And I think it's given them like an evolutionary advantage. If you think about it, fire occurred naturally for thousands of years through, as you know, glaciers left our area. Fires were set by lightning. Fire was also set intentionally by Native Americans too, for management of the land. And so over time, this species, especially bur oak leaves, but all the oak leaves, they're thicker than other hardwood leaves. So they decay slower. They accumulate thicker. All right. So more fuel to be able to burn. When you analyze moisture content of species of leaves, oak leaves are going to be drier than other hardwood species. Great for fire. The way that the leaves curl, the shape that they take, promotes the carry of fire throughout the woodland floor. The presence of tannin within the leaf makes them break down slower, again, leading to more leaf litter on the ground for longer periods of time. All of this leads to how good fire is for our oak ecosystems. And I know I just got done talking about insects and how important they are within, and how they're just like in these oak leaves. And so that's a balance that we have to strike, right? As landowners and land managers, and as just people who care. So don't burn the same oak woods every single year. Don't burn the same section every single year. Rotate, okay? Let these insect populations replenish themselves. And you can also see, and this is why I use this picture of like a little kid sitting right next to the flames. A lot of times these oak burns are pretty boring. They go generally kind of slow, and they don't really burn super intensely hot. So it's really just the upper layer of oak leaves that burn. Oftentimes, there's more additional leaf litter underneath that doesn't even burn. And you can see as you look through this picture, there's patches all over the place that never burn. So it's never 100% like, you know, all the leaves are burned and everything is ash and it's just bare ground. There's usually little patches that are left. All right, so things that you can do to support oak trees. Leave the leaves underneath them. Don't run them over. Don't mulch them up. Don't take them away to the street. Now, obviously, I know that's not like totally possible in every single yard. Do what you can, all right? Get some native plants growing underneath your oak trees. If you could go to the drip line, perfect. If you can't, do what you can do, okay? Avoid compaction of the soil. We talked about that. Don't like drive all over the place, you know, and obviously I showed you that graphic now of how far beyond those oak roots extend beyond the drip line. All right, so try to protect that as much as is possible for your property. Remove invasive plants. That's a given. They're competing for resources with our oak trees. Okay, so the buckthorn, the honeysuckle, the multiflora rose, all that needs to go. All right, periodically burn if you're able to do that safely and you know how. And also, if you have new oak seedlings popping up, protect them and cage them if it's doable for you, to cut down on browse damage from deer and rabbits and all kinds of stuff. Okay, so what are we doing here in McHenry County to protect and take care of our oak trees? So the Land Conservancy of McHenry County is a nonprofit land trust. Our job is to work with private landowners, okay? And we do that through a whole variety of ways. One of them being education. So workshops, I do a lot of workshops for us, both in person and virtually. Like we just hosted a workshop about caring for your oak woods. And in that, we taught people how to investigate the history of their land. So this is an example of an 1872 survey map from Seneca Township here in McHenry County. And you just look in 1872, do I see little drawings of trees where I lived? If so, yay, cool, I was in the oak woods. So it's just, we're teaching them about investigating the history, but then also plant and tree and shrub ID, how to actually use the tools to remove the invasives, brush saws, loppers, the correct herbicide and how to safely apply it to the cut stump, seeding, so getting the native plants back in and follow-up management. So all those different kinds of things we go through. We also have something called the 5,000 Acre Challenge. And this is just an incentive for oak landowners to enter their oaks into the website 5000acres.com and help us get to 5,000 acres of oak woodlands in McHenry County that are being taken care of. Okay, that's what we care about, are the oak woods, how many acres are actually being taken care of and have active work being done on them, whether it's burning or removal of invasives or mowing, if you can't burn, or getting native plants in, all these different things. And there's a cool interactive map on that website where you can type in your address and it's going to bring up a GIS layer of green and a dot, and it'll show you, all right, if I'm in that green layer, that means that my property was historically in 1837 covered by oaks. So it's kind of cool. We also have our Conservation at Home program, which is being done in Winnebago County as well, and a bunch of different counties around Northern Illinois originally started by the Conservation Foundation. This is where I go and do a site visit for you, and walk your property with you, help you identify stuff, help you come up with a management plan, or you know, here's native plants that I would put in, that kind of stuff. We also do all kinds of other things that I'm not like even going to go into with separate slides. Things like acorn roundup, where people bag and bring us their labeled acorns, and then we give them to a local nursery who propagates them. We do a native tree, shrub, and plant sale. I know you guys do that too. And yeah, we're selling oaks and hazelnuts, like, and all of the oak friends, the plants, all of it. Memorial and celebration oaks. So that's through our Project Quercus community oak planting program. People can purchase a memorial or celebration oak, and we plant that in a public area where people can come and visit that particular oak tree whenever they want. We take care of it, water it, maintain it throughout the years. We also work with other community groups, scout groups, schools, to plant oaks on their property and give them a little lesson, you know, about oak trees. We have conservation easements, so people who want to preserve their land forever. And our easement coordinator, she works with those landowners and actually does work days on their properties once a month. They rotate, so that's pretty cool. And then we have restoration work days on the properties that we own as well, where it's a great opportunity for people to learn about how to do this kind of stuff. Okay, so with that, I've got a bunch of resources here. I'm not going to bore you by reading all of them, but there's some really great resources about learning more about the history and the ecology of oaks in Northern Illinois. One thing that I want to point out, which is applicable for you guys in Winnebago County, the Land Conservancy, we run a private Facebook group called LEARN, which stands for Landowner Ecology and Restoration Network. It's the very last thing on the page there. We encourage landowners to join that, and we don't care where you're from. Most people are from the Midwest. Post your questions, post your pictures, okay? And there's a bunch of knowledgeable restoration ecologists, knowledgeable landowners who are going to jump on and give you some really great information, okay? So with that, thank you so much for spending some time with me here, learning about the ecology of oaks. Keep up the great work with Wild Ones. I know how much invaluable information and how much overlap our missions have with Wild Ones, with just wanting people to get some native plants in their yards. So kudos to you guys for that. And reach out anytime you guys have questions or whatever. My email is on the slide there. But thank you so much for being with me today, tonight, whenever you're watching this. See you later.